Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's discussion of EVE'S Bayou. We're very happy you could join us, and we are very happy to be joined by Jennifer Fleeger of Ursinus College. Jennifer, how are you tonight?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for suggesting this film. I also want to give a special welcome to the good number of Jennifer's Ursinus students who are joining us for this discussion. I would look forward to their comments and questions as well. For those of you who might need a little bit of a reminder, please keep your audio on mute until I call on you to ask your question or make your comment. I will know to call on you because you can use, and you hopefully will use, the raise hand function within Zoom, which you can see marked by number 2 there on your screen. I will call on people in the order that I see them appear in the list, and I will try to get to everyone at least once. I can't always get to people for a second or third question, but usually we can get to everybody once. And I would encourage you to use the chat function as well. You can introduce yourself to the group. You can raise questions, ask comments, chat with other participants, and let us know where you're from, particularly if you're from outside the greater Philadelphia area. And if you're from really far outside the greater Philadelphia area, please consider visiting the Where in the World section of the Film Studies Online portion of brynmarfilm.org, and let us know how you heard about us and where you're joining us from. And as you can see from the map on your screen, we've had folks from all over the world and lots of places in our own country. And it's always exciting to hear where people found us or how they found us. So that would be great if you would care to do that. But other than that, I think we're ready to jump into things. And I see we have our regular first batter up. David, your question or comment, how are you tonight?
I'm great, and we are back from Brooklyn last week and back in Ardmore, so I don't think I go in the Where in the World this week. No, doesn't count. Jennifer, thank you for another wonderful expansion. I'm going to ask you some questions, or some of my thoughts, I guess, tonight are on the cinematography. I mean, this movie has probably at least a half a dozen, maybe a dozen different things that you could delve into, and hopefully the two of you will. But the cinematography, to me, Amy Vincent appears to have done this magnificent job. And I'd like you to comment. I think that she was a newcomer at the time. Right from the beginning, taking those beautiful views and that shift from the black and white to the color, giving us the beginning of the rest of the story, and those shots of the bayou from the ground level, most of them from the water going up, and also the way she captured Eve's eyes, and I guess I'm going to say she captured jealousy with nothing but a look, and let you sort of respond to that, and the beautiful Spanish moss in the sunlight. She seemed to have taken a lot of these shots either early or late in the day for some of those major reflections, and they were just absolutely beautiful. And as you mentioned, reflecting not only the mirror, but the water as well for some of these scenes. I could probably have watched this with the sound off and had an amazing 2 hours. So thank you, and hopefully that gives you one or two thoughts to start on.
Well, I would just like to mention before I throw it over to Jennifer that I think it's wonderful that you give the cinematographer credit for capturing looks of jealousy, but there's at least some extent to which we have to give credit to the actors, and particularly young Jurnee Smollett for a remarkable performance for a human being of her age.
That would have been one of my other 10 or 12 items that we could have talked about.
Fair enough, David. Jennifer, your thoughts on the cinematography?
I have always thought this movie was such a gorgeous film, and it didn't really even occur to me until relatively recently to discover that the cinematographer herself is a woman, and as you say, was relatively new to the field at the time the movie was made. It's pretty rare in Hollywood for there to be a woman cinematographer who's recognized, and so for this to occur is wonderful. I love the comment that you made about the way that she films the bayou and the water at different moments of the day because of that closing line, how the truth changes depending on the light. And so I think that the way that she shoots the water kind of reflects that notion about how truth isn't always the same and our memories aren't always the same either. It's interesting though, this black and white memory, the use of the black and white for the memory. It seems like, okay, we can talk about photography and maybe how photography looked in 1960, and this is why flashbacks happen in this way. And it certainly distinguishes it from the rest of the picture. But I don't know exactly what to say about it beyond that. But I think your comments about how she shoots the nature are just absolutely wonderful.
I think in some cases, particularly in most of the ways it was used in the flashbacks, the black and white, even though we say something being black and white, we talk about that being a sort of clear way to look at things. It's either black or white. The black and white photography to me was a bit less clear than the color photography. I didn't have the addition of color to differentiate shapes in the landscape or in costumes or things like, or the setting, things like that. So it took me longer to get a handle on what I was seeing in some of those flashbacks, particularly when the images were obscured or partially obscured. So to my mind, the black and white not only made it seem, sort of an easy way to sort of say this is the past, but also a way to make things for me as a viewer less clear.
Yeah, and I think the editing contributes to that too in these moments. But of course, as you know, like grainy black and white images have come to signify truth because of their connection to documentary history. And in this case, Moselle's images are correct, but they're not always entirely accurate depending on, or if we're thinking about the bus accident scene or something like that. She can't place it, but it's correct. And so it has that significance of being authentic without necessarily giving us a pure vision of what would happen.
And something else that I appreciated about the cinematography, and it's not just the cinematography, it's also the screenplay and the direction, but I appreciate how much it avoided cliches of footage of that part of the country, of that sort of environment. Like I didn't see a single alligator or crocodile or anything like that. And I honestly don't know if they have them in Louisiana or not, but when I've been conditioned from movies, maybe too many Burt Reynolds movies, that when I see scenery, geography like that, I expect there's going to be some sort of massive toothy critter. And we didn't see any of that. And there were other things, the sounds as well. A lot of the cliches that, people like me who've never spent any time in that sort of region with that sort of topography think, have these ideas from movies and television, and they really avoided a lot of those cliches in the way it looked and the way it sounded. Joss, do you have a question or comment?
Sure. First of all, a thank you. I've never seen this film before, and it's a shame that it was not recognized as it should have been when it was released 20 some odd years ago. Certainly everything that you've already talked about, the visual texture of this film, the wonderful performances from everyone, especially the young people, especially the young woman, the kid who played Eve. What an astonishing performance. I appreciated Jennifer's reference in her introduction to Kill a Mockingbird, which this somewhat resembles structurally. One of the things I found very interesting and compelling about this film was the structure of memory, which we certainly have discussed, the presence, or at least the perception of magic and magical thinking throughout the film. It brought to mind, at least in a couple of small ways, other films that deal with differential memory, like Rashomon. And a couple of other things. The opening scene in this was a party that introduced all the characters and the relationships and the framework for this story, and it did it wonderfully and seamlessly. I think that, it's been done elsewhere at other times in other subjects, like The Godfather, for example. I think this was beautifully done. And one other comment, the only other film that I'm aware of that I've seen by this director was the recent film Harriet, which was a completely different film. Certainly visually wonderful and wonderful performances, but much more straightforward plot. And it was really striking to see this film, which had a much different sort of plot structure. All right, so I've noticed several things about this film that were wonderful and interesting, and welcome any comments you have.
Jennifer, did anything Joss said jump out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think in 1997, the film really was widely praised. Ebert called it his favorite film of the year, and it was the most, I think it made the most money for an independent film that year, or was the most widely seen or something like that. So it's not like it was ignored at the time that it came out. But I agree with you that a lot of people haven't talked about it that much since. And I have long wanted to show it more often in many of my classes. I've showed it a couple of times, but not every year. And so I think that there's a lot in this movie that we can talk about cinematographically and thematically, and in terms of how film itself is like memory, how film itself is like the mirror, or the two-dimensionality of reflection, or all kinds of meta concepts that we can go in a direction with this movie. But why I like to show it is just because of the complexity of the child's experience. And as you connected it to To Kill a Mockingbird as well, there's a way in which we think as children that kind of gets lost. And in that opening voiceover, she still seems to believe that she killed her father at 10 years old. And how can that be? And so I love the way that the film blends an idea of how we would narrate our experience as children with an adult voice at the beginning and end of the movie, and how it tries to negotiate that possibility.
I like how there's a subtle change between the opening voiceover and the concluding voiceover. And it reminded me of a little bit in that just this one regard of Sunset Boulevard, where there's a subtle change in a word, and you realize that makes a big difference sort of in retrospect. I think that one of the things I like about this movie is that often when a movie is told from a child's point of view, we are sometimes left to wonder whether we as viewers are supposed to incorporate the fact that it's from a child's point of view into our perception and engagement with and understanding of the movie. And this movie, so something like Roma, for example, where there are things that, depending on what you thought of that film and how you perceive certain things, don't, to me, make more sense if you keep in mind that it's a story he's telling based on memories from his childhood. Here, because the movie foregrounds its, consideration of memory, it reminds us in a way to do that. And we're more, anyway, when watching it, was more conscious of that potential filter that I was viewing the movie through the whole time. And I think that's useful. And I think it was partly was entirely by design. And I think that adds another layer of complexity to the movie. Janice, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. I absolutely loved this movie. I thought it was wonderful. And I had never seen it, and I had never even heard of it before. And I tend to react to a movie more viscerally first, and then think later about how they happen to have it done, so that made it happen for you. And some of the things that really meant a lot to me was, first of all, the child's memory, because even if you're a child not in the bayou with magic and all of that, you really do think that you can affect things and even your thoughts that if you have bad thoughts, that something might happen to you in the childhood, things that we would do with rhymes, step on a crack, break your mother's back, and things, just all kinds of things that children think that they can make happen. So that was one thing. And I just absolutely love the part about memory. And I also really like the treatment of the bayou. I've seen so many pictures of the bayou, which were scary and not showing it as a place that people really lived lives of opulence. And the other thing that affected me and I thought was wonderful was the choice of subject matter. That is, seeing the lives of these upper middle class African Americans and how they lived, and really quite well, and the way their lives were. It was really, on some levels, so appealing. And of course, other things happened that were not. And I thought the acting was superb. And that's really pretty much what I had to say about it.
Okay, thank you, Janice. This movie, is wonderful for a lot of reasons. One of them is it shows people and places that some of us, I'll just speak for myself, haven't had a lot of exposure to, either in person or on the screen. And it is sort of worthwhile, to my mind, just for that. But then you add on to that the thoughtful storytelling, and you add on to that the important themes that it engages with, and there's really a lot to think about here. And I can understand why it was added to the Library of Congress a couple of years back, because it really, Library of Congress is in part interested in preserving the sort of history of American culture, and you can see all the different ways this film would be valuable toward that end. Jennifer, anything you wanted to add?
Not specifically. I guess one thing that I wanted to note that I've been thinking about this time, and because Janice reminded me of it, is the voiceover at the beginning tells us about who Eve and her family have descended from. And in that story, there is this kernel of information that, of course, their ancestor had been a slave and had helped her master get well from cholera, and then bore him 16 children as if being grateful for her freedom. That little comment, it's the only moment that we have at all in this movie, I think, about whiteness. But it's another one of these moments where we have to recognize the history of American slavery and the ways in which people's parentage in the past were deeply troubled and problematic. And because many of the students who are on this call today had been reading the narrative of Frederick Douglass, and we've been talking in class about Frederick Douglass, how he didn't know who his father was, and how it was probably the master of one of his mothers. There's just this complex history that I love how Lemons puts it in the beginning and then allows it to empower the female characters in the story such that it becomes their space and their heritage and their legacy. So it's an interesting framing.
William, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, that was actually perfect timing, because I wanted to ask a question in regards to that. But first, just some quick comment. I agree, the acting was great. The children were great. Debbie Morgan, she was phenomenal. And I do realize that I did learn that she did win an Independent Spirit for that. The picture got an Independent Spirit for first feature. And that's quite impressive for a director first time putting out such a remarkable film. I thought the film looked beautiful. I kept noticing the color. It looked rich. I don't know, it looked so well done. And that then brings me to this point. And it's tied into the slavery racial stuff. Maybe I missed this. What year does this take place in? And second of all, how do I ask this? Well, knowing, my limited knowledge of the South and, slavery and racism and stuff, I looked at this film and I noticed, like, I don't know if the word would be, it's romanticized more, but the interactions, when I saw the gatherings of people, I would see whites and blacks, and I saw no issues. I also saw, like, how did they get all this money? Did this come down from him being a descendant of French aristocrat, or because I just didn't think, knowing some history of the South, that again, depending on the year, they would have such a rich, wealthy looking house and life. So that's my question I have.
Well, he was a physician at a time when that position had the potential to be even more lucrative and was held in even higher regard, as in many ways, particularly in more rural areas, and particularly, in this case, as we heard from in his letter at the end, some people viewed him as a hero, and he very much embraced that in some ways, not all of them good. But I think it's 1962 or thereabouts.
Okay.
And I wasn't. First of all, I don't think you saw. I think you saw people of different complexions, but I don't think there were any Caucasians in that opening party. I think there were Creole people, and
not the party. I'm sorry. When they went down to the place to shop, I thought I saw a variety of people there, and it just seemed like, hey, everyday life. This is how it should be. Like, there's no issues. Maybe I missaw it, but that's what I thought I saw.
No, I mean, I'm no expert on the region or the history either, but my limited understanding is that, that particularly, those of us up north and those of us who are learning from a distance of time and space, there were towns that, there were people who got together, right? On some level, there are people who can interact as people. And I think that the history of racism in this country and differences between blacks and whites in this country and the history of the South is not all one thing or the other. Life rarely is, right? Things are much more complicated. And so I didn't find that didn't really stand out to me. My understanding is that there were a number of small towns where there were, things weren't constantly at the sort of, razor's edge of conflict or what have you. And in terms of their wealth, there have been African-American professionals in the country for centuries. Even in the years immediately following the end of the Civil War, there were judges and people elected to Congress and all sorts of other professionals.
Correct.
Yes. And so, that was the case here for this family.
Yeah, it's nice to see films that have these, I guess, like positive images. When you see different races, different religions, cultures, even women. Just, it's nice to see that in film. A lot of times at least growing up, we never got to see that too often, and it's just refreshing to see stuff like that in movies. And that's what I really appreciate about this.
Well, thank you. Jennifer, I just did a lot of talking there. Anything you would care to add?
I guess I would also note, in addition to everything that you said, and Evangelina in the chat has noted that he was a doctor when no white doctor would have served Black people. So in a way, the ability of his profession is due to problematic issues in American history. But I agree with everything that you pointed out, Andrew. I would also point out that it's important to the film that the land be passed down through the women's line. And so this is why the female characters are so connected to the kinds of messages that the bayou can whisper into their ear, or to the second sight, or to the reflection of the mirrors and the water. It's the women who are able to do that because of this legacy and connection to Eve. And so I think it's important to understand.
Even more empowering than in the movie. That's really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Arlene, you have a question or comment?
Yes, first of all, I loved the entire film. I really liked every one of the characters in the film. Every one of them had some flaws. The charming father had his weaknesses, but he was so lovable and likable. And you really felt what he meant to the family. And the women, they were just so strong, and you became so involved in their lives. And looking at it, I'm an artist, and these beautiful, beautiful women. I just enjoyed just looking at the array of the skin tones and the dimple in the cheek, and all. It was just beautifully captured and beautifully done. But I really like the relationship of one person to another, the mother to her children, and the aunt with having no children, and the superstition and the magic and the voodoo. I loved every aspect of the whole thing.
Great. I'm glad you liked the film. Liz, did you have a question or comment?
Do you hear me?
We do. Go ahead, Liz.
I was trying to figure out Eve's motivation in a way, because the layers, the threads that are there, is that she gets most of her knowledge, precocious knowledge, I might add, through eavesdropping. And I thought that was an interesting thing, because when you do that, you never get a full picture. And also there's the fact that she got so upset after she had stuck pins in the doll that she wanted to represent her father. And then the voodoo lady said, no, I just threw a box in a crocodile, and you know, that was that. It was like very weird. And actually, I was confused as well about the mother, because you didn't see her that often interacting with the children. And I think that the children were reacting, many of the things they reacted to is because they didn't have facts about things. Like Cicely didn't have facts about what it meant to be in love. Eve didn't have facts about, you know, what the sex act might mean. And I just thought if the mother had filled them in on something, Eve wouldn't have been as upset and distraught all the time as she was.
I think that everything you just said goes together perfectly. So, for example, if we're giving a film about a child's perspective of the world, the mother is not going to play a predominant role in how they see things. They're trying to discover on their own. And that's the eavesdropping that you pointed to. And then the voodoo moment is this desire for control that children want to have over their lives and can't have. Even if it's some kind of terrible thing that they wish to engage on somebody else, they aren't able to enact it. And so she's frustrated because she can't actually make the choice. She thought there was another step to be had. And this lack of facts that you have over information, the way that we see that in the film, I thought was just a perfect presentation of how children see the world, and they don't know everything. And so you're trying to piece together things through eavesdropping, which is of course how we learn in the cinema too, right? The only way we learn about people and their lives is by eavesdropping on what the director is going to show us. So all of these things, the eavesdropping and the voodoo and the lack of facts and the relative absence of the mother, she's there, but like she's not, we don't see her explaining everything to children, because that's not what this kind of genre is asking of us. So it all works together, I think, to give a portrait of how Eve sees things.
I mean, I also think that, you know, a lot of those things might not necessarily have, even in the most communicative of families in 1962, I don't know that all of those topics would have been covered in sufficient detail at that time. And I think we can probably agree that there was an extent to which the mother was in denial about what her husband was like. Or at least she was trying to put it out of her mind. And so those sorts of topics, to my mind, wouldn't be the sort of thing she would tend to want to discuss with her children. And then there's the point where at the meal, when Eve is really kind of asking a lot, saying a lot of things, asking a lot of questions, her grandmother says, in my day, kids didn't participate in the conversations adults were having. And you know, I sort of felt like this was, you know, it's 1962. This was a sort of a transitional time from her grandmother's sort of era and the more contemporary era. And I don't know that all the things that would have straightened everything out could have been communicated. But of course, you know, as Jennifer said, that's not what this genre is. And that's not what a story told from a child's point of view is like, in any case anyway. And even if we are to sort of think that this is the adult Eve telling us, and that the adult Eve has sort of pieced some things together over time, that's still not the story that I think is being told. Robert, you have a question or comment?
Oh, yes. I came into the film from what Jennifer had said, truth changes color depending on the light. And I thought there were two instances in the film where that became very clear. The first one was, what was the truth about that incident when the girl was on her father's lap and they ended up kissing, and one point of, and we saw that twice. One point of view was that the dad had initiated this and that he was kind of committing child sexual abuse. But when we saw it a second time, and we read the letter that the father had written, we saw it again, I think in the black and white, I guess, right? It then seemed very clear that the father had not initiated this kind of sexual contact, but that the child had initiated it through some weird reasons. What I wouldn't understand why a child would do that, but there were two very different. You saw the same incident depending on the light, literally between black and white and color, and you also saw how the truth would change, because the first instance was clearly this man was a child sex abuser and could have been charged and put in jail, and he'd lose his medical license forever, and his, and the wife would find out, and then he'd lose his wife and never see his kids again, probably. On the second view, though, it was initiated. He was not the aggressor, and he was taken aback by the child's aggressive kissing. Right. And so I just feel like in these days of where men in particular are being fathers and are being accused all the time of sexual abuse or kind of sexual harassment, that sometimes the truth changes color depending on the light, and it can make enormous. I mean, I just thought that was such a truism. It can make an enormous difference.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have two accounts of the same event from two different people, and we don't really have, we don't have concrete evidence one way or the other which one is accurate. I mean, is that your perception, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think that the reason that it's being framed this way is because there's a lot of growing up means that you don't always know. And Eve is never going to really know, because Cecily doesn't really know herself. And when she touches her hands, she realizes that the answer to this question isn't possible. It's not in Cecily's brain, because her brain is also developing and the incident is so confusing. And so I think my perception of why Kazi Lemons doesn't answer the question for us one way or the other is because we have to go through life sometimes not knowing answers to questions like this. And it's very disturbing and it's very troubling, and it happens to a lot of people. And so it's better to be, I think, for the director of this film to portray that as a complex moment and not answer the question. than to be definitive one way or the other. But the party scene gives us some hints of what might, occur. And I think that David's initial comment about how that party scene sets up these relationships, and we can see exactly how the thing is going to unfold from that moment on, gives us a sense of what the truth might be, but we don't know. And we certainly, I don't think, are led to suspect that the letter is the definitive answer, that the father had the correct response and it's all fine. I don't really think that that's Lemons's point at the end of the film.
But would you agree that the second issue was whether the father was having an affair with Mrs. Morano?
I think we know that's true.
Okay, but there were two takes on that, remember?
Yeah, but one of these was given to us with Cicely leading Eve through what is clearly a narrative that Cicely herself doesn't believe to be true. And that when we see them both in the scene looking at this impossible situation that couldn't have taken place.
Right.
Yeah, so and I think Cicely actually says to her, I knew that was true when you told me.
Yeah.
So that's not the same sort of.
That's not the same, yeah.
Yeah, it's not the same dynamic. Thanks, Robert. Dana, you have a question or comment?
Yeah. Actually, I do think that the question was answered about Samuel Jackson's intent. And I do think he was not abusive. And I think one of the things that I found to be magnificent about this film was that curious, nebulous, difficult time when little girls have to fall out of love with their fathers and figure out where their mothers fit in and where, helpful other relatives like aunts can help them. I think I rather, even though it was Eve's story, I thought Cicely had a whole lot to do with this story. And a lot of it was from her point of view. I think she was desperately in love with her father. She was thrilled at that party when she could dance with him. She was very upset when she learned of the affair, perhaps because it wasn't her, which was a very understandable thought for a 14-year-old who was in love with her daddy. And I think these two little girls went through a process, which I think was calibrated so magnificently in this movie, of learning what it's like to watch your parents not be perfect. And certainly they had a father who was no Atticus Finch. Let me just say that. And I think that the sense that I got at the end was these two little girls were sort of growing up together and recognizing that this is going to be life and this is how it is. And I absolutely, I want to come back and say it again. I absolutely do think that both of those little girls at the end of it knew that their father hadn't been abusive to that little girl, to his daughter. But it took some growing up and knowing for them to come to that conclusion, or at least that's what I wanted to believe, because I thought that's what the memory idea of this movie was all about, looking back and coming to grips with memories and making sense of them. And I had a really positive feeling about these two little girls as they grew into women, that they would be very, very close. And the family tie was very much there. I just loved it. I just loved that whole imagery of loss of innocence for little girls.
Okay. Tracey, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I really like the movie as well. However, I have a couple comments about this line of discussion we're having. I think it's insightful, the comments that were just made, but I think in any kind of potential issue for sexual abuse, you always have to look at the power relationships of the participants. Clearly, the dad, like a boss, has the power because that's what makes that figure so attractive. So in terms of setting boundaries, even with his own daughter, it was his responsibility. So I don't find him, particularly we know because he doesn't set boundaries with other people, as being innocent in this regard. But the other comment that's related to this, but different, that I had a hard time with at the end of the movie, and maybe I misunderstood it, is I felt that Eve, the child, had something to do with her dad's death, because she was the one who put the ideas in the husband of the woman he was having an affair with, that there wasn't something right about it, and set up the whole situation, and in fact was present when that guy shot his dad. So I was wondering about your comments on that.
Jennifer?
Yeah, that's true. I think both of your points are completely valid. And as to the second one, I think that the film is setting us up to believe it's voodoo all along. And that's why when she has this really quite sassy conversation with that, with Maddie Moreau's husband, and she knows exactly what she's doing in planting that seed. And we can tell in her acting style that she knows what she's doing in planting that seed. That you're right, that is what ultimately leads to the death of her father. But of course, her father did everything that she said he did. So it's not her fault really that another man got jealous and shot her own dad. But I think that's the way that Kazi Lemons as a writer and director is leading us along, you know, and then pulling the punch there and showing us, actually it was this thing that ended up in getting him killed. So yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly understandable. I mean, if she's savvy enough to talk to Roger Guinevere Smith the way she does, then she's savvy enough to understand how she set that chain of events in motion. At the same time, though, you know, if not for his inability to control himself, her father could have walked away alive that night, right? He can't control himself, and he can't, you know, not do the thing he's not supposed to do. So he had to call that for that woman. He had to address her directly one more time. And that's what did it. If he hadn't done that, the story would have ended very differently. So, I mean, there is some extent to which I can understand why Eve would feel responsibility. But at the end of the day, not just because he did everything that, you know, upset the man who shot him, but he pushed that last button when he really, really, really didn't have to. Reena, you have a question or comment?
Yeah. Well, I think this was I also enjoyed the movie very much. And I think it was such a beautiful way of showing the experience of, in this case, a young girl, and her sense of guilt, you know, because I think when you're a kid or an adolescent, you have no idea of the limits of your own power. So she feels like in some way she really caused the death. And in some way she really did, because she brought the two together. But because she's a child, I guess she can't see the degree to which her father was responsible in the way that he talks to his lover's husband. And, you know, that's where we see that our point of view is not identical to Eve's point of view, because we do see that in a way that she doesn't, you know. And the irony of it is that it wasn't the voodoo, which is what she wanted, how she wanted to kill her father, and something that was sort of in her tradition, her women's tradition to do voodoo. But it was, you know, something, what do you want to call it, very secular, you know, just talking to the man and giving him hints. And the other thing is, from the way I saw it, it looked to me like the father did set a boundary, because he pushes her off his lap and slaps her when she starts to kiss him. Or even when he starts to kiss her back, he realizes it's wrong and he rejects her. Now, again, he doesn't talk to her about it. He just sort of pushes her away in a way that is not, I guess, good for her mental health. It's the best way to put it. And in that way, and that's where, you know, but I'm not sure if it is sexual abuse exactly, because it didn't look like he was the one who was initiating things. And once he realized what was happening,
he made it stop, which he doesn't do with the other women.
I think it's important that both of the stories about what happened in that moment are given to us from a deliberate perspective and not framed as objective. So one is the narrative that he's giving in the letter, and the other one is Cicely's memory that she tells Eve at the beginning. So neither of them can be counted on to be total truth, I don't think. But I think the first comment that you made is extremely important, because it reminds me that it's almost as if we're having two kind of narratives coming together. One in which there's a masculine battle, for this duel to the death that's going to happen at the end of the movie, where the father is going to make that final comment back and the other guy's going to pull a gun, and that's the death. Or we have this more feminine story, which we've been told from the beginning, where the land and the traditions and the female community are important and determine one's destiny. And it's in that moment, those two visions of how things happened kind of come into conflict with one another. And to me, when you said that, it's almost as if Eve, narrating this story as an older woman, is attempting to wrangle back that vision of events toward the female history and the female community and the legacy of this land and the traditions of her people, as opposed to just a banal, or as you put, a secular masculine tradition where we shoot each other over a woman, and her version is much more interesting. And that's what we get to see for 2 hours of this movie, and not the version where Maddie Monroe's husband gets jealous and shoots her father, So I like that you put it that way.
Oh, thank you.
Amy, you have a question or comment?
Yes. So I wanted to it's actually Amy's husband. So sorry if you think I'm Amy, but the last scene that sets up the murder. The little girl goes to the voodoo lady, Diane Carroll's, house, and it was. I guess I wasn't expecting her to have a confrontation with the voodoo lady. It wasn't sort of explained to me. At least in the film, I only watched that scene once. Amy and I watched others twice, but then she leaves directly from there. She's disappointed, but she's not confrontational, at least that I remember. And then how does she end up making her way down the railroad track right to the bar? So obviously it's compressed in the film's time frame, but it just seemed to me that was, what was it about the confrontation with the voodoo lady that was important at that point in the film?
I think that the second time she sees Diane Carroll, she realizes that she's not going to be given a mechanism to kill her father. Diane Carroll says, I already set things in motion. So she wants to go, I don't know, warn him, protect him, or maybe be there to see it. But she has this new element of alarm, because what she thought she was getting, which was, the means by which, based on her, control to cause her father to die. She thought she was writing a letter and putting it in the drawer, right? But what she really did was write a letter and have it overnighted. At least if we hear if what Diane Carroll's telling her is true. So I think that's what gave her the sense of urgency to go track down her father wherever he was.
And
Jennifer,
maybe,
is that?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, maybe everybody on this call is a better parent than me, but sometimes my children shout at me, I hate you, or something like that. And I know they don't mean it in that moment. And so if they had said that and known that immediately there would be some horrible reaction that would happen to me as a result of them screaming at me, I think they'd be horrified, right? So there's a way in which children, I think it's demonstrating that children react and respond and want to damage somebody, and then maybe want to take some time to think about what that really means, or to reverse it, or to undo it, or to recognize that their complex feelings for their parents are not at all always contained in a moment of anger. So I like your overnighting metaphor. That's nice.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, we don't currently have any hands raised, so unless there are any more questions, or Jennifer, if you have any points you wanted to share with folks that we haven't touched on yet.
I don't know that I have anything additional to add.
Okay. A couple more hands.
That always happens, Andrew, every time. You just have to say it and they pop in.
Right. Well, it wouldn't be very nice of me to just all of a sudden hang up on everybody either, right? Tracey, go ahead.
Jennifer, I just want to tell you that when this movie was announced, I went on to see your preview, and I think you did such a good job with it that's what convinced me to watch the movie. So I just wanted to give you a recognition for great job with introducing the film.
Thanks, I appreciate it. It was an important movie to me when it came out. I think it really taught me a lot about how film works, and it was important to my own development and my own thinking at the time about my own past. So it matters to me.
But you also had the foresight and the insight and the technical ability to make a video introduction in the style of the movie, which and one that didn't involve umbrellas or children in costumes,
singing in French
and but still was as effective and engaging in its own way. So Tracey was right to compliment you on it. Really, it was a great introduction. Arlene, you have another question or comment?
Yes, my questions are about in the culture, exactly how much of the voodoo or the mystical belief really pervaded the culture. For instance, the aunt really thought that she was cursed and that she would never be happy with someone because this was going to follow all of her life. She also was frightened by some of the things she saw when she touched their hands. And I know that this kind of thing can be a frightening experience. Actually, my mother had some contact with someone who was living near her, who was a gypsy, who taught her a little bit about reading cards. And my mother, reading cards for some of her friends, informed a woman that her husband had made some investments and didn't tell her about them. And the man came to my mother and was very upset. He says, "Why did you tell my wife, and how did you find out about it?" My mother decided never again to attempt to read cards. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing when it gets involved in your life, really bothers you or really influences how you think and do. So I'd like to know a little more about the particular culture we're talking about.
Well, I don't know enough to be able to speak intelligently about it. What I will say is that this, it's not, it's obviously not a, there's obviously some debate and range to the perception and use and appreciation of these powers within this community, this town that we're seeing in the film, right? Because some of us would, in the big picture, some of us might say that the Diane Carroll character and the Debbie Morgan character have similar abilities, but the two of them obviously see themselves as being completely different from one another. Eve's mother sees it as sort of like a harmless entertainment, which plenty of people in that town don't see it as that. So there's a range of views on it represented in the film, but I don't know enough to say about, Creole culture and the extent to which voodoo is a presence in it or anything like that. I really can't say.
I have a student who did a project on Haitian practices in the cinema, and she was always very upset because the representation of voodoo in American cinema in particular is often associated with horror film or, supernatural things, and it isn't often treated very respectfully. And I think what Andrew was just saying, like in this film, you can kind of see a battle between those two positions because Moselle is a wonderful character and her visions seem to be accurate. And she's forming a community with Eve, who also is having this gift. And so it's a way of seeing female talent and ability that's passed down through the generations. And then on the other hand, you have the Diane Carroll character, who is supposed to be this kind of more creepy figure that sort of recalls those other genres that we see in the past. And I don't know that they're the same, like that they aren't treated the same way in the film. And so again, this is another way in which Lemon's film portrays a really complex portrait of something that has often been treated with very little sophistication by Hollywood. And so it's one of those things that I quite like about the film.
I like that also.
I also, thanks, Arlene. I also like that this is the only movie I've ever seen, I think, where the sort of representative of the sort of what's supposed to potentially be the scary voodoo shops for produce at a farmer's market. So that was nice. David, you have a question, another question or comment.
Well, part of what I was going to bring up was mentioned, but Jennifer, I want to make a comment, since we have many people on that are somewhat regulars, about your varied methods and abilities in your openings. I don't know whether you do it consciously, but you have used, I would say at this point, at least a half a dozen different thought processes and between your family, actors, etc., and motifs. And this one was, again, different. And it adds not only to our education, I guess, but to our additional entertainment value. The other thing, if you would talk in a little bit more about children actors in general, and how this film, in some respects, I thought used them a little differently.
Thank you for the compliment. I feel like I make introductions to try to make people happy. So if it makes people happy, then that's a good thing. None of us can sing or act at all, but we do our best. As to the question of child actors, I guess I'm not really sure what you mean. I think that they're much more natural in this film, and the two little ones are actually brother and sister in real life. So maybe that's what made the natural relation seem a little bit more accurate to me. But I think the style of child actors, of course, changes in different periods, and we're not looking at Shirley Temple, a kind of performative stage kind of aspect anymore.
Well, yeah, Shirley Temple being one of sort of the one extreme, and I did think that these two, while they were certainly children, they seemed more mature as actors, even though I think from their bios, they were both pretty new to acting. And I just didn't know if there was anything that you knew about their backgrounds.
I know that the film took a long time to get funding, which is one of those depressing aspects of production history, that Kasi Lemmons took the film to 100 different meetings before she could get somebody to actually pay for it, and that Samuel L. Jackson was one of the producers on the film. And so the girl who played Cicely was actually meant to play Eve initially, before it, and they started production and building all the sets before they were able to find the little girl who did end up playing Eve in the end. So that's all I know about the production history of the children's casting. I'm sorry, I don't know more.
I think probably a lot of what you're identifying or mentioning, David, has to do with the director, right? I mean, the director, a lot of us tend to think about the director of a movie for his or her visual style, and certainly that is an important element, but the cinematographer has a lot to do with that. The only person who's really talking to the actors about what they're doing is the director. And I think that the fact that Kasi Lemmons wrote this script and directed it and had been and remained an actor herself, probably all combined, I mean, in addition to her obviously having talent as a filmmaker, all combined to enable her to get particularly good performances from these kids. And I don't know that I would call them unique, but I would certainly call them rare, in that the kids seem mature enough to perform what is required of them in the roles, but not sort of ridiculously advanced or mature for their ages. That there's a part of it's the naturalism that Jennifer mentioned, but I think part of it also is them seeming to be able to somehow communicate that they have some understanding of what's going on, but not a full understanding of what's going on, and distinguishing between what they may know as actors, having been told the story, but what they're supposed to know as characters in a given moment. You could see how that could be difficult for anybody, let alone kids, but they do it very well. And I would tend, I mean, they've both gone on to have careers, and I'm sure they're, in a range of movies and television shows. I mean, they're obviously, you know, accomplished professionals, but I would give Lemons a good amount of credit for getting sort of from the two young people at the center of this movie, such great performances from both of them.
Thank you.
Sure. Amy or Amy's husband, you have another question or comment?
Thank you. This time it's Amy. And I wish I could change the name to Amy Nor and Jeff Metz. So sorry about that. I'll try.
That's okay. No problem.
I thought we both thought this movie was fantastic. And my question is about Moselle's visions, which Arlene already, like a lot of that was already asked and answered with Arlene and both of you. But just to ask a little more. So Moselle, I mean, her visions are, it's incredible. I thought that was an incredible parts of the film. And it seemed like they were pretty much accurate. But apparently, I guess she can't see her own future. Although when she goes to the Diane Carroll character who calls her, you know, I think it was a Black widow, and, you know, anybody she marries will die. I didn't expect that she would accept Julian's proposal because thinking he would then die too, but she does. And then she shares with Eve her dream of the night before of, I guess she saw a woman drowning who was her, and she let her drown, and maybe she flew away, and then she accepted Julian's proposal. So I'm just wondering what your take on that is. Is she like extinguishing her prior self so that she has a clean slate and won't have this, you know, horrible, you know, future with anyone she is attached to? I wasn't sure where that might go, and I wondered if you had ideas. Thank you.
Jennifer, do you have any ideas?
I guess my only thought would be that is a symbol of her reattaining agency over her life and refusing to believe in absolute destiny, that there's a way in which her desire to be in control over herself is going to be more powerful than whatever prediction somebody else might make, and that's a choice. And I think that's a kind of vision that perhaps a lot of young women need to hear. So I understood that for me, that's why I think that's in the film.
Reena, you had another question or comment.
Yes, just very quickly. I just wanted to thank Jennifer. I also was drawn in by her introduction, and I got to see a beautiful film that I had never heard about before. So thank you.
Ken, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, hi. I've had to run in and out a couple of times during the discussion, so I apologize if I'm asking something that's been covered. But I'm not sure early on the Branford Marsalis character, quite who he was and what happened to him. Was he the one who the funeral was for early in the movie?
Yeah, he was Moselle's husband, Debbie Morgan's husband,
Right.
and he died as her two previous husbands or lovers had, and it was just another instance of her believing that she was cursed and leading to others believing she was cursed as well.
Okay. And the other scene that I thought was a little bit strange and troubling is when the young boy was hit by the school bus, and the reaction from the family was to celebrate. And I know it was the grandmother who made them realize, but it seemed a little morose that by him being killed, the curse was lifted off them. And maybe that's part of the culture and the way of thinking. But it struck me, and it kind of went right. They did it and went right past it, and that made everything. It was a positive step for them.
Well, I think it was grim and unfortunate, and that's why it's pointed out to them. And we saw these characters that we've spent the movie identifying with do something that maybe wasn't so nice. On the other hand, I would say that the two younger kids are pretty young, and they've been forced to stay inside for weeks and weeks because of their mother's, it would seem, irrational fears for their safety. So given the last year, I can tell you what happens when you severely limit the activities, movements, and social interaction of a young child. So I would hope that my own would not jump up and down at the opportunity if it occurred at the expense of someone else. But I would also, I think, not hold them too much to account for it, given what it's been like.
I know. I think on this viewing, when she said like they've been locked in this house for weeks, I started laughing. I was like, "That's nothing,"
Right.
In which those scenes, you identify with them so differently now. But I know what you mean, Ken. And I think that in terms of the mother's perspective, like this is a woman who's really struggling. She knows what's going on with her husband. She's really worried about the future of her family. And so I think that seeing her react in that way is a more natural reaction than we might want to admit at that moment.
Yeah, and I have to share the thought that others have, that I'm surprised I'd never even heard of this film before, with someone as high profile as Samuel L. Jackson. And some of the others, I was really impressed. Usually when I see a movie with someone like that I haven't heard of, my thinking is that's probably not very good, but I didn't feel that way after watching it. I'm glad that you suggested this one for us. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Ken. And thank everybody for joining us tonight. We have had, I think, another really interesting discussion. In large part, I would say thanks to Jennifer's great insights and obviously, from what we've heard from many people tonight, another stellar introduction. Jennifer, all you're doing is raising the stakes for yourself and expectations moving forward. So,
I'm gonna learn to sing. Is that what it is?
Yeah. But look at it this way. You've been doing what you've been doing for months, and it hasn't led me to put on a single costume in one of mine. So, do what you feel comfortable doing and leave it at that. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We have a number of our Tuesday seminars coming up in the coming weeks and months. You can see them there on your screen. These are on Tuesday nights, and they're a more focused, in-depth sort of seminar interaction on the topics outlined below, and we'll have some more to announce in the coming weeks as well. If you want to get reminders about these, or you want to find out what we're going to be discussing most Mondays coming up, please visit the Film Studies online section of brynmarfilm.org. We have a lot of other film-related opportunities for you to have some fun, to learn something, and to connect with other people in our area who are interested in movies. And if you want to be the first to know what movie we're going to be discussing on Monday, sign up for our emails. Every Thursday, we send out our education email, and it tells you what movie we're going to be discussing the following Monday, gives you a link to the video introduction, whether it has musical numbers or not, and also gives you a link to the various places you might be able to find the film to screen it. So please do sign up for those if you like what we're doing. And if you really like what we're doing, there are a number of ways you can support Bryn Mawr Film Institute. At Theater 5, in our Theater 5 section, we have new movies that you can only see by virtually screening them through a theater like ours. They're typically not available on demand or any other way. And there's some really great movies that our special programmer, my colleague Jacob, picks out every week. So check those out. And we appreciate when you do that. We appreciate when you enroll in one of our courses. And of course, we appreciate any additional financial support you can offer, either by becoming a member, renewing a membership, or by making a donation. We are working hard to be able to reopen. We are currently offering theater rentals at some very reasonable rates. So that's another opportunity to go see the movies you love at a place you love to see them. At least we hope you do. But until we are able to open and things return completely to normal, any financial support you could offer would be appreciated. But until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody, until next week, have a good night and take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.